So today is Monday, July 14th, and we've got some interesting topics again this week, plus a special guest. Today we're talking about Google has been ordered to pay $314 million for misusing your cellular data in California. The second one is the Department of Justice is actually investigating an ex-ransomware negotiator over extortion kickbacks. So they're getting paid by two people. Good stuff. Not really good. The third story is overemployment. People with multiple jobs that are remote. Maybe that's why so many people want to go back to the office. They got to make sure people aren't overemployed.
All right. And with our special guest, this is the DTF Cyber Podcast. I'm Damian.
This is Troy.
And it's your boy, Fern. Let's go. Very special person in the studio today. I know him as DoubleM. That's his code name. He doesn't know that, but now he does. It's the one, it's the only Mike Manrod. Say hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike. I'm really, really glad to be here, Fern. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. You know, you were actually the first guest on the other podcast. So it only made sense that you were the first guest on this podcast. And the reason we have you is because we have room. Damian's, he's out of the country right now. So we said, we have to start bringing in some experts. We have to start bringing in some people. It's not just the same three of us. So you are not the inaugural. I don't even know what the right word is, but you're the first guest. So for the people that don't know who you are, maybe they're not in Arizona, maybe they haven't heard of DoubleM, Mike Manrod. Go ahead and tell them who you are, what you do, or keep it a secret. It's up to you.
Oh, the keep it a secret sounds mysterious. Thanks. So Mike Manrod, a.k.a. Crude Solutions, and I wear a few hats. I am CISO for Grand Canyon Education and by proxy for GCU. I teach malware analysis. And then I co-founded and helped teach and lead the Threat Intelligence Support Unit, aka TSU, and also support the ACTRA community. But I think what I'm most passionate about in all that, obviously the teaching, but really the research. Ezra Woods, aka Shama Woods, and I, and a lot of our friends have been working on, different research projects and different opportunities to study what adversaries are doing, emulate their tactics, and create testing frameworks to see, hey, how do our tools and environments hold up against really realistic testing? So that's been a huge part of what I've been focused on lately.
Okay.
What I like about Mike and in the community is that you are so involved in the development of the next generation talent pipeline here in Arizona. So thanks for everything you do. And again, thanks for joining us on, as our first guest on this podcast.
Yeah. And what I was going to add is if you're going to be at DEF CON at Black Hat, Mike will be there signing jerseys, signing anything that you want to bring to him. You just have to bring the Sharpie and make sure I think is blue the official one that they always have you sign with, because you can't replicate it. I think there's a certain Sharpie color. So you'll be there presenting on some of the recent exploits that you guys have been working on, right? We don't have a date yet, but we do know you will be there. You will be presenting with Ezra. So if anyone listening is going to be at Black Hat, be sure to check out the schedule, look for Mike Manrod, Ezra Woods, and go support their discussion, right?
And clarification, we'll be presenting at DEF CON Demo Labs, not actually Black Hat, but DEF CON Demo Labs will be presenting over the weekend, like Friday, Saturday timeframe. But yeah, I'm excited. Come out, say hi. Got about 600 stickers from a few of our frameworks printed, and I'll be giving away a lot of stickers out there.
Yeah, and for the record, Fern, I don't think you've ever been to a B-Sides Black Hat DEF CON in Vegas. Hacker Summer Camp, right?
No, it's going to be my first one, and it's going to get crazy. I hope.
Yeah, I was going to actually say thanks, Mike, for clarifying, because there's so much going on that week. When you're here, you got Black Hat early on, you have some events now. It's actually extending into the previous weekend. So I saw a couple of things going on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And then as we transition in DEF CON, you have B-Sides, you have the different villages at DEF CON. So, if if you're going to find Mike, make sure you know he's in the demo village.
All right. And I guess with that, we'll get into the first article. Google. I use it. You probably definitely use it. Probably use it a lot less if you're using ChatGPT, like myself. But this is interesting because in California, a jury found that Google was transmitting Android user data on network and over the cellular network, rather, right? So what's interesting about this is they were just like sending telemetry data without people realizing it. And for me, the context that I thought was interesting about the article was that the plaintiffs in the argument said the traffic could have been deferred until there was Wi-Fi. So I don't know if it was the deciding factor about this being it was done with the cellular data and that's what caused the burn, but they're being, well, I guess they have an appeal now, but they were ordered to pay $314 million. I don't have $314 million, but I know they do. But I know the people that are claiming
Well, I think the concern would be for people who may pay for their data on cellular network. There's additional charges, right? So I don't know how much data that is. If it's like, 10 or 50 meg per day of telemetry data being sent over the cellular network. If you think about this, if you're charged by the gig, by the meg for cellular data access, that adds up. So I think that's where they're coming after Google. Now, the bigger question is, is there a privacy concern here, even if they're sending it over Wi-Fi? I think we all know we're being tracked. We know there's a lot of data that Google's collecting about us, what we're searching, where we're going. I think even in Google it tells you how busy certain locations are based off of some of this traffic.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let me ask you guys, because all of you have worked in the corporate space, right? The enterprise, businesses, and you guys all run security programs either today or at some point. As an outsider looking in, right? For me, what I think is interesting is what if those devices were corporate devices, right? Now that not just a personal cell phone. So like everyone has a personal cell phone and what they choose to do with that is up to them. And, having an issue with Google is one thing. But when it comes down to an organization that might have devices, not bring your own device, but they actually have corporate issued devices, what happens there? Because now these businesses are being charged realistically, right? But more so than that, their data is being sent, right? So are businesses at the mercy of the T's and C's of Google, or is there some sort of recourse that businesses have? I don't know. So I'm going to ask the pros.
Yeah, so the first thing that I laugh about when you hear like Google fined 314 million, before we like zoom back to your question, Fern, is who's getting the 314 million? Like if it was my data plan, are they going to cut me a check personally for some of that?
50
For
cents.
$2, yeah.
Yeah,
You'll probably get
$2, right?
$2.
Exactly, $1 a person, 50 cents a person. But no, I mean, I think it's a really good point, and I think sometimes it really comes down to the details, Fern. I mean, if we look at it, I think it would matter a lot to know what data was sent, and I think I'd have to know that to give an answer of whether I was concerned from a corporate perspective. But let's face it, whether we're talking Google, Meta, X, any of these platforms, it's no secret that they're all gathering a tremendous amount of telemetry about us and then using that. And you've all Noah Harari, talked about the notion of, hey, what happens when our algorithms know us better than we know ourselves? And when either the algorithms themselves or the people controlling the algorithms use that to manipulate us for our own gain. And as I look out at Prime Day and the suggestions and all of that, I mean, I think we all can see that's happening from a privacy perspective.
Well, let's simplify this a little bit more, right? I know these are big tech companies and we know they're collecting data about us, but what about your employers, right? So if you are a security department, do you track where all of your employees are? And are you worried if there's a regional threat? So right now I'm traveling, if the city I'm in has an earthquake or there's some political, what do we do? What are you worried about the interruption to your business? And Troy, I don't know if this is something that you've worked with or how you deal with in the past with business continuity and understanding where your users are. Do you need to know where all those users are,
Yeah.
and do they consent to it?
Yeah, there's definitely a company that I love, and we usually don't call out company names here just for not to show bias or preference. But this one's unique because Data Miner is a company that's been doing this for almost 15 years, and I'll use the Saudi Aramco example when the Saudi Aramco oil field got bombed by a drone attack, and I'm talking about not military drones, commercial drones. And so basically, a Twitter user saw these lights in the sky and was filming and said, "Look at these beautiful stars; they're very interesting." Well, Data Miner's algorithm was able to hear the sound of a drone, saw that they were heading towards the Saudi Aramco fields, and they kind of put two and two together through their intelligence network and say, we predict this is going to be, something bad for Saudi Aramco. They actually knew about that attack 30 minutes prior to CNN. And so I think that is kind of what you're talking about, Damian. There are companies out there that are listening to all the public information on social media networks and, news networks and so on, and stitching together those type of things. And companies like that can show you, if there is a natural disaster in a city, where all your users are, what they should be aware of, and quickly alert them, like the Texas floods as an example. Or, if you have an executive traveling overseas, like you said, Damian, you want to make sure there's no protest going on. There's no, animosity, make sure that your executives are safe. So there are companies out there that do that. Switching back to your,
There are, but the problem, Troy, is that a lot of employees, users, do not opt in or don't want to opt in for location tracking. So I don't
Exactly.
know
And so-
what point do we have, like, it's mandatory that you alert the company when you're traveling, where you're traveling to.
Yeah, so that goes back to it's only as good as the amount of information you give it, right? So if you don't know that I'm in Taiwan, you're not going to be able to alert me that there's unrest there, right? So exactly, so true. And it goes back to the whole monetization here. You ever see the commercials where it says text and data rates may apply? We hear this so often, we actually forget about it. We ignore it because we've heard it so many times over the years. But that's kind of the case here when you start sending all that data over the cellular network. Those little roaming charges or those data charges start adding up under the covers. And so I think that was the big part of this case. But when you talk about individuals' privacy and how much information that they are storing about us and how they're tracking our preferences and where we are and what we do, there's a 60 Minutes episode that showed even if you turn your cell phone off, if you completely turn it off, it still records location data. And so you turn it off, turn it back on an hour later, it's going to send all that data where you were for the last hour up to Google's servers to track your preferences. Now, that data is not exactly available to your spouse or your loved ones, for tracking you in those kind of ways, but it is able to track you for showing you preferences, shopping, restaurants, and so on. So that's a little bit scary as we look at that. But as you mentioned, I think we are just getting used to the fact that our entire world is connected, and we need to understand this data that's being concerted about us.
Yeah, but back to the article, this was a lawsuit because of the cellular data use. I think we can go down a rabbit hole of what information is being collected about us, and I think we're all in agreement that there's probably a lot, right? I don't know, Mike. Do you ever think about going off grid completely and disconnecting and trying to not have your data being sent to all these providers?
You'd have to go pretty far off grid. I mean, okay, so you can't be anywhere where there's traffic cameras, right? Like you can't be anywhere where basically you can't have any situation where you drive, go anywhere, pay for anything. So I mean, I pretty much cave people. Like that's about the
I got a
extent.
solution. Hey, let me borrow your car, Mike.
There you go. That's hilarious, Damian.
I don't know. We'll say as a consumer, I don't necessarily care, right? Because I know they're going to get it anyways. Like when I think of Google, I don't necessarily think of GCP, right? If I was hang on, take a half step back, right? As an average Joe, so as an average Fern, not in tech, not knowing anything about security, if I have a phone, if I have an Android, and I'm using Google, like I don't think anyone ever. And you guys, I can stare you all in the eyes right now. I know you guys don't read the T's and C's. People can say that they do, but most people just skim it. And I think for the majority of people, they're never reading. They're just like scrolling until the continue button highlights and they're clicking it again. So when it comes to this, there's always going to be a trade-off. on privacy versus security, right? And I would say, I would even argue a majority of the average Ferns out there, the average Joes, don't necessarily think about these things, right? So is it a problem? Maybe. Do people care about it? Maybe sometimes. But is it more important for businesses to consider these trade-offs versus the consumer because of how it affects the business? Or is it just more so, well, they just got caught with their hand in the cookie jar? And it's just...
Well, I think this is the question is, do they have the rights to use your cellular data without your knowledge? I think that's what this particular article is all about, not the actual data that they're collecting. In some countries, I know in the United States, we have unlimited data plans, so maybe it's not such a big deal. But there are other countries where you're paying per gig. You're on a plan where you have a limited amount of data. And in those cases, I don't think it's right for a company to force uploads of this telemetry data that may or may not benefit the consumer, but it's going to cost the consumer additional charges for the data to be transferred.
Yeah, and if you, I don't know a single person who actually reads the T's and C's, and we're in tech, right? Imagine the average consumer, but I know my peers. I don't know anybody who has said I read every T and C that I sign up and agree to. You may be out there, but I haven't met you yet. But my point is that if you ever have stopped to read the terms and conditions, it's like reading the King James 1611 Bible. Thee, thou shalt beget this, that. I can't understand it, and I'm a very well educated on MSAs and legal documentation. Like if you read this, you get confused. You get, it's not easy to read it. It's not like saying, we're going to use your data to do this. It's very confusing for the end user. I really wish we had a way to simplify that in legal, in language that is not legalese, as I call it.
Yeah, but we're not necessarily reading them because we have, in business, we always have a legal department or a contracts person that looks through it. Any good CISO or CIO will have that contracts person that knows all the T's and C's. So you can ask them, what are my obligations and what are the obligations of the vendor for certain situations? And they'll know, or they'll look through it and let you know.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I want to be clear on this one. I read every terms and condition MSA that I sign for business. That's not what I'm saying here at all. You have to read those with a fine-tooth comb. I'm talking about the consumer ones for Google or Facebook or Meta or X or whatever it is. If you look at those, as a consumer, I look at those and I'm like, I don't know what you're telling me. I just don't understand. I click accept. I don't even know what I've just given you the access or the rights to do with my data because it's so confusing. But for business, absolutely, you have to read those.
Is there a crossover? Because we do use personal devices for business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where the rubber meets the road and where it gets really gray. And it's funny because, I think all of us here, I review a lot of contracts as well as part of my job. And it seems like if it's a $100,000 or $1 million piece of technology, it's 20 pages, 12-point double-spaced font in a Word doc. If you download a free copy of Putty, it's 100 pages of 4-point font, single-spaced, and you're paying nothing for it. So, all right, who reads every $1 million contract they sign? You might get some pretty good nods in a room full of tech execs. Who reads the fine print of every single free download, every single subscription service? Probably none of us. I certainly don't.
Can't you just load it into Gen AI and ask it, hey, what does this say? Can you give me all the fine print and have it spit it out?
You can, and I've started doing that actually. Even when I'm going to read a whole contract, I'll load it into Gen AI, get a summary, and then I know what to really focus in on versus what to skim. And I do a better job. I miss less.
So you've actually fed a contract or snippets of a contract?
The whole thing. I've also vibe generated entire 20-page contracts where I give a 9-sentence prompt, put it in a deep reasoning model. It asks me several follow-up questions. I walk away for 10 minutes and then just review it and tweak it. And it would have taken me a day, and it's done in 15 minutes of work. It's kind of amazing.
So you're a vibe contract writer?
I try not to write contracts at all, and I always send them to counsel. But if for some reason that falls to me, yeah, I am definitely using the AI.
Interesting. I don't know. So we talked about on the personal devices, right? Well, so do you guys care if it was on a corporate device? Or maybe more specifically, how do you audit third-party companies that potentially might be sending telemetry data of the business, right?
Hot take here, Fern. I actually really don't care.
Oh.
Because like when I really zoom out and I look at the risk of like users that could pick weak passwords, I look at the risk of, supply chain attacks, I look at the risk of, dependency libraries that have flaws. Like just zooming out, I look at all the things that could cause us a bad day, and even third party risk, a cloud provider leaking all the data or being breached. If you start stacking all those risks and then you look at where Google uploading telemetry data fits in that risk model, it won't even make the top 100 list of problems and things that stress me out. So as a consumer, like I'm a little worried, but as a corporate security program, I'm not too stressed. Hot take.
No, I think the only time it matters is if you have a VIP where their physical location is a safety issue. And so, for example, if you have a high-ranking officer that you don't necessarily want most of the public to know where they're at, you don't even want Google to know where they're at. In those cases, I would be concerned.
Yeah, like a United Health type organization where
Right.
might be relevant.
This is true. People knew where they were at, where he was at, right? So I don't know. It's interesting, and
But that wasn't even telemetry data. That was just like public information that was out there.
People usually aren't going to do something super, super complex and advanced if it's possible to just Google the answer. And I'm sure that was a case where you could just Google where he was going to be that day.
yeah, or at least be aware because of board meetings, right, earnings and things like that, right? So I don't know. I guess it was a pretty hot take. I feel a little gassy right now. Like I got a burp. I got a burp. It was a little bit spicy, Mike. So before we jump into the next one, I think any hot takes from either you, Damian, or Troy? You got anything spicier than that, or are you guys kind of in the same boat?
No, I think Mike summed it up. I totally agree with him. There's much more pressing issues that we spend our time on than this one. It's interesting for sure, but it's not going to be the top thing I work on today at work.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, like I said, if there's a VIP that we have to keep their location under wraps for whatever reason, for example, we don't want, let's say there was two companies that were going to do a merger and you see meetings, right? CEOs meeting with other CEOs. You don't want anyone to know that they're meeting at maybe a partner's office or a competitor's office that spins off rumors. And so in those cases, yeah, we try to keep location and metadata under wraps. But for the most part, personally, I see the value, right? I like when Google tells me, hey, traffic going home is increased. Maybe you want to wait a few minutes before you drive home. In that case, I don't care. I like the convenience.
And I agree, Damian. And Fern, just to add some cool avocado sauce to that spicy take, I feel that way a lot of things, right? Like people are obsessed about quantum cryptography right now. And I mean, let's just patch and get our domain controllers set up correctly before we worry about quantum cryptography, right? I feel like there's a whole lot of things that get a lot of attention. But then if we just stack rank our risk, most of our problems are much simpler.
Yeah, so you're back to the basics. Get the basics right and worry about the other things as they come.
Yeah, exactly.
Mike Manrod is dropping truth bombs on the DTF podcast. That is absolutely one of our biggest challenges in this industry. I call it the shiny object effect. Everybody's chasing a shiny object, the newest thing. We got to get our assets under control. We have to do our basic block and tackling. We have to patch our things. We have to fix our user privileges and overprivileges. So many things to focus on. Quantum cryptography is not the thing that's going to cause a breach at your company today.
Nah.
No, that's tomorrow. That's tomorrow. There's a lot easier stuff today. That's for sure.
Love it.
Well, now let's just imagine we're all working at a company that gets popped, gets hacked, right? So who are we going to call? We're going to call Digital Mint in this case, which happens to be the company involved in the next article. And we're going to call it Digital Mint, and they're going to help us because we're being extorted. Now, just imagine you have to pay some money, right, to these threat actors. You send a bunch of money out. So apparently Digital Mint has done over 2,000 ransomware responses since 2017. Now imagine you call these guys, hire them for the job, and you find out not only did you pay them for their services, but they got paid by the hackers. A little something off the top. They got scammed a few bucks. Simply, well, I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouths, but there was an employee there, has since been fired, on the suspicion that they arranged ransom deals with cyber criminals. So, double dipping, for sure. But for me, I think the first thing that I think of is, should there be any sort of due diligence or oversight on firms acting as intermediaries in these cases, right? There's always like there are always groups of people that have oversight into certain areas of security. Is the ransomware negotiation part something that should be looked into for things like this? Because I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If you show me the incentive, and by the way, this isn't my phrase, right? If you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome, right? I believe it was the gentleman from Berkshire that's attributed to that phrase. But yeah, you show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome. And in this case, the incentive is getting paid, and we can clearly see that people are taking advantage of both sides. So,
Yeah, I don't know, Fern, if this is really a case of the incentive versus the outcome, because this is a criminal. This, and I'm not talking about the ransomware. I'm talking about the employee at Digital Mint who's taking money from criminal organizations on the back end. I mean, this is just a crime. This is not somebody who's trying to fix their life for the better, or do good and have two jobs. Or we're going to talk about overemployment later, but this is somebody who is taking advantage of somebody who's already been victimized. This guy should be put under the jail, I think. We see this a lot. Imagine a different scenario. You have a human who's kidnapped and being held ransom somewhere, and your negotiator is taking kickbacks from the kidnappers to, get the price right with the. I mean, come on. This is absolutely, despicable, in my opinion. And this guy should be held to account. And it is a criminal act. If he's found guilty, he'll go to jail for that. But, the funniest thing was today in the news, a Russian basketball player who plays for the University of Pennsylvania was just arrested for the same thing. So we're talking about two cases of somebody acting as an intermediary and taking kickbacks from the ransomware group on the back end to negotiate ransomware payments. So I'll give you the link to that story here after the podcast. That just came in today.
Well, I would say negotiating to pay the ransom. I think we've been saying in previous episodes, don't pay it. But I know there's always a case where businesses feel like they need to get that data as soon as possible, and they'll need to pay some sort of ransom to unlock it. But I think, negotiating and paying puts you in the spotlight even more, right? They'll target you even more because they know you're going to pay. So just be careful there. But yeah, I agree, right? If you're going to opt to take a third-party negotiator, the hope is that you trust them and they're going to be acting in your best interest, not trying to take money on the opposite side. Well, you're paying them for their services, so they're taking money on both sides. I think this is quite common. Let's just look at kickbacks in our industry to begin with, right? What about technology leaders that take a kickback off of a purchase of a tool or a product? Yeah. I think that's a huge ethical problem if it happens. That it never should occur in the first place. No one should ever consider that, but it does happen.
Absolutely. We see it all the time, and we hear stories about it. I know the FTC and the federal government's looking into several cases of that, and that payment it's not always cash. It could be stock, it could be options, it could be equity, it could be fancy trips. We've even seen boats and cars, believe it or not. It's just crazy that can happen in our industry, but it's happening. And I want to just clarify one thing here. Digital Mint, this is not a reflection of that company. This is one person who made these decisions on his own. Unless we hear more that Digital Mint was somehow involved in this, I want to make sure that the company, is an incident response firm and has done years and years and years of good service. This is one specific person on that team and has been fired immediately. There's no indication that the firm Digital Mint was involved in this at all.
I got a question for you, Mike.
Yeah.
What's your policy for where you work in terms of taking gifts from vendors or obviously you can't take kickbacks, but like Troy said, there's other forms. There's trips. There's, I don't know. I've been offered a car one time, and I turned them. This was like 10 years ago. They said we'll give you a car, and I just declined and walked away from that. But yeah, what are your policies at your organization?
Well,
Tell them about the dinners. Tell them about the dinners, Mike, or not the dinners that they buy.
Is there a limit? Like, I mean, dinners are one thing, but if you're going to a really super fancy dinner, that might be questionable.
So I think Fern's alluding to a negotiation approach I have, and I'll circle back to that in a second. But I think when I get these emails that say, "Hey, if you take a meeting with us, we'll send you a gift card or buy you some Nikes or something," I have like a templated reply I always send to those that, "Hey, this is your one warning. If you're caught doing that again, we'll block your entire domain from our entire company." Like your entire email sending domain of like that vendor. So I give like one warning on that, and then we just block them. If I found out it biased an employee's like decision making, that would definitely be a big problem. So my general thing for things like a dinner or something like that would be, if it's a well-established relationship and it's clearly not biasing anything, I think it's fine for a vendor to pick up the tab. On the flip side, if you have a huge fancy dinner 3 weeks before a first time PO is about to get cut or something major is about to be renegotiated, that's problematic and it shouldn't occur. So I think there's some nuance and discretion there. But Fern brought up something funny. When I'm actually doing vendor negotiation, if I think it's like really going to get contentious and a vendor invites me out to dinner, I don't do this all the time, but sometimes I will invite them over to my house as the counteroffer. I will cook. I'll make it like a 5-star, get like a really good Wagyu steak and a nice bottle of wine and make it just like you'd get at a really fancy place. And it's a little bit of social engineering, but then they're kind of walking away. It kind of flips hey, they wanted to take you out so that you're subliminally beholden. So cook a meal and it kind of has the reverse effect.
Makes it what? So you get a better deal? Is that?
I don't know that it really does, but it's certainly nobody's ever going to call it improper if somebody wants to have dinner with you the week before a big deal. And again, if you go to a sports bar and who picks up the tab for a couple beers and some wings doesn't matter, but it's more a matter of, if there's like, there's definitely a line where, any sort of gift or benefit could be questionable. And then obviously the extreme cases that you and Troy brought up are spot on for that. But I mean, I think we just need to have discretion, be good stewards. And I agree, Troy. This is one bad person who clearly was a criminal and should be treated as such. Like that's fraud.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I would say it does matter if that bar is the Hard Rock in Yankee Stadium and you're sitting front row eating your chicken wings and having your 2 beers.
Right, exactly.
It all depends on the atmosphere.
I only had popcorn, but it was at the Super Bowl. Okay, well,
Yeah, there you go.
You got, what are they, not center line, what do they call it? Midfield, like the 50-yard line tickets, and you had free popcorn. I was just enjoying a game at the Super Bowl.
we just all need to be good stewards as an industry, and there's going to be bad apples, but I think people usually try to do the right thing.
Absolutely. I think that we really, I think folks like us, we just believe in the good in everybody, and we think that the whole industry is doing the right thing all the time. And then you hear these stories, and you're like, "Oh my God, you're shaking your head." So we talk about getting into cybersecurity and careers in cyber. So I'll give this nugget of truth out there: if you are advancing in your career in cybersecurity, know that people are looking. Okay, if you make an ethically questionable decision about whether to take a gift or take a fancy dinner or something that's kind of questionable, that's noticed, and if it happens in multiple times, it becomes a pattern. If that pattern continues to increase, people may think something negative about you. So, if you're going to really try to maintain a career in cybersecurity, it's about trust and integrity. Make sure that you maintain both throughout the entirety of your career.
Yeah, one of the places I worked at, they used to have a limit on gifts, and so you couldn't take anything more than like $50 or $75. And typically, what I did was I'd take the gift, but then I'd save it for the team and then either raffle it off or give it away to the rest of the team. I never personally kept anything. So I'm always conscious as well if I'm meeting with someone, if I'm going to pick up the tab, just make sure I know what's acceptable for their organization. But
Mhm.
even myself as a customer, I'm not very comfortable with, anything that's super expensive. Although I've never been invited to the Super Bowl, so that'd be an interesting problem to have.
You just got to spend enough. You spend enough, you get anything.
And that summarizes exactly the problem. And the situation's relative. Like you mentioned $50, Damian. We're all going to be out in Vegas soon. I'm pretty sure you can pay up to $20 or something for a bottle of water there. So,
Mhm.
like if you have a $200 meal tab in, Oklahoma City, that's very different than a $200 meal tab in Vegas. That might have been for like ramen and one plate of sushi.
Yeah, no, this is true. But so, I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but I will say one thing. You know how whenever there's an event coming up, like waste management or a concert or things like that, those tickets aren't just randomly, I guess, handed out, right? Those tickets go through an approval process. And typically the question that's being asked is there an opportunity on the table right now? How much are they spending with us? And is this going to help us push opportunities further along the line? So regardless of if it's ethically okay or not, on the sales side, a lot of times these decisions on what is being handed out and to whom is dependent on the business, right? And that's why when Damian said he's never been offered certain things, I, kind of jokingly says because you don't spend enough. It's because there's a lot of times where, even here when the Super Bowl was held in Arizona, everyone had tickets. A lot of vendor partners had tickets, and they spent a lot of money. And trust me, they weren't handing it out to the people that don't pick up the phone, right? They were handing it out to the people that spend millions of dollars consistently or have the potential to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And I think that's kind of where it's a fine line for the people that are on your side to think about it is could it be perceived as unethical, right? So
Absolutely.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. And I know in my past jobs, we had very strict limits on the dollar amounts, but you have to remember that, multiple nice dinners can add up to greatly exceed that acceptable dollar amount. It could be $400, $500, $600, I think was the usually the threshold in my previous roles. But if you work in federal government, state government, that's much less, or you can't even take anything at all, even a dinner or coffee. So I think it really comes down to, what's reasonable and acceptable to your company. But you have to remember to yourself, like these people are not buying you dinner because you're a nice person. They're trying to get your attention, your time, and eventually a PO, right? But that's, it's about the relationship that you have with your vendors. I think it's a good thing to spend time with them to get to know what, the problems are. And I was going to ask Mike, because we talked about this in one of our first episodes, was, people aren't picking up the phone anymore. After COVID, it's been so tough to get event customers' attention. And so we saw a lot of these very unique events, whether it's whiskey tasting virtually on the phone, where they send you a bottle of whiskey, or a chef that comes on and cooks with you in your home, a pair of AirPods, as you mentioned, Mike, or a gift card. Like, I think vendors are really just trying to find a way to get back in front of their customers after COVID. It's very difficult for them. So I kind of see both sides of that coin.
Yeah, it's a good point, Troy, and that's why I think we need a balanced approach, right? Like I think it benefits defenders to socialize, to network, and to share. Um, we have some circles of us that do actually get out and do it on our own, but that's only because we met originally at events that probably were sponsored indirectly or directly by vendors. So I do think there's a balance to it, Troy. And I think if we went to like zero tolerance across the board on that kind of thing, I think it would create an unhealthy dynamic. And then biasing decision making, I think, is also an unhealthy dynamic. So I think there's this balance, but I think a huge part of it is where are you in the sales cycle? Like
Mhm.
if you're on a 3-year deal and it's 1 year into it and a vendor takes you out to dinner, you probably shouldn't worry too much. If it's the month before the next 3-year deal, you should probably be watching it really, really closely what's happening and why and how.
Yeah, you just
Yeah,
touched on something very
especially.
interesting. Sorry, I was just going to say, you touched on something very interesting there that I didn't even think about, is that, some of the best knowledge transfers that I get with my peers are at group dinners that, like the ones we had in Scottsdale or here in Vegas, where you get 20 CISOs together in a room with one vendor. It's a nice dinner, but the knowledge transfer in that Chatham House rules kind of environment that you can talk about real breaches and real issues that have been seen in your own local community, I think that is priceless. And I think that is something that we do need more of. So good point, Mike.
Yeah, I think those networking events where it's not like sales heavy, but just to build the relationships, those are great. But I was going to say to your point, Mike, if you're in an active RFP and you're testing out multiple products, that's probably not the best time to be wined and dined by everybody who's trying to get your business.
Yeah, this is true. But I've been in situations where there's been a lot of money on the line, and trust me, I'm fighting to get in front of people. So, dinner on a
What's
Friday?
so let me ask you this, Mike. What's the best gift you've ever gotten?
The time and attention of people that I enjoy chatting with.
Oh man, that's so politically. Yeah,
Being here
Good
with you
answer.
guys, this is the best gift ever. But no, it's so there's actually a legitimate, I'm going to temporarily dodge that question for a second, but I think that what Fern, you brought up a really interesting point, which is I think that when we look at this, if there's no reasonable situation that would have me go out for a happy hour at 10 p.m. when tonight, for example, except for the fact that I'm already in 12 to 14 hour meetings and one of my vendors wants an hour with me, and they know that if they pick somewhere with a decent Manhattan, they'll get me out at 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. to catch them, right? So I do think that sometimes as we're giving people time that we should give them and we're taking it out of our own schedule, I think picking up the tab for that's reasonable. Although I always offer to split it or I always offer to pick it up even in those situations, right? And I don't I think it has more to do with the mindset. In terms of gifts, I think the best gift I ever got was that Red Ryder BB gun when I was like 8 years old, Damian. It was just so cool, and being able to shoot that like wooden barrel of wire and hear it plink when it hit the other end, like that's probably the best gift ever. Yeah, grandfather, 8 years old.
One of my teams, we used to have Nerf wars in the office. I won't mention the employer because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But anyone on my team, we 40 people with Nerf guns. One of our vendors found out, they were in our office when a war broke out. The very next day, they dropped off a couple of branded Nerf guns.
Dang.
I thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool. Yeah. And like, what do you do with that? Like, do you have like 20 cheering employees out there in the cube floor? Do you take those and walk them out to the dumpster and throw them away? That probably wouldn't be a very effective manager, but is that a gift from a vendor? Yeah. So like, how do we? I mean, I know we're running long on this topic, but I think we could talk about this one all night because it really is a difficult challenge for our industry.
I'll tell you one crazy story that I had heard in my career. I was working with someone. I won't say their role, where they worked, or their name, but I will tell you that I was having a conversation. We were in an RFP, and in that RFP, the remark was made of, "Well, you're just going to have to get my boss a jet ski or better." And I said, "What? How am I supposed to do that?" And I was like, it's more so a joke. Like, well, why would you say a jet ski? And the person, he or she, may have said, well, because the rumor is that this person has received that in the past for purchases. And so my question was like, so you're telling me the manager of this organization in this department, the employees at this company think or believe that they had received the jet ski in not necessarily in exchange for a purchase, but as like a thank you gift? And the answer was yeah, right. And there was no way to ever prove it, but it's always been a running joke between myself and this other person, where I will always say something about like, have you ever gotten a jet ski, right? And it's just like we just laugh about it, but yeah, these things happen. And then if they do happen, and the employees are aware of it, it just kind of creates like a a weird cultural dynamic, right? So bottom line is, if you're in tech and someone offers you anything, just don't accept it. Chances are you're making really good money on your own. Realistically, if you've been in the industry for a few years, maybe 5+ years, you're probably making 100,000. You can afford AirPods, right? You can afford your own $70 of Angel's Envy whiskey rye, right? The good stuff at Costco. You can afford all these nice gifts. You might as well just buy it for yourself and eliminate any sort of conflict or potential that people would assume that you're involved in stuff that could ruin your reputation, right? And I think with that, we can move on to the next one, unless you guys wanted to add anything else.
Just keep the ethics high for our industry. That's what we're trying to do.
But that takes us to the next one. Are you ethically a bad person if you work multiple jobs? Now, in this specific example, there are people that are considered overemployed, right? A lot of them are Korean, working for North Korea, but we're not necessarily counting out those people.
Sorry, I thought that was totally something else there. No, that's good.
No. I was
That was
referring to the North Korean scams that we've talked about in previous weeks. But so overemployed, people that take images and kind of alter them in multiple aliases, right? But there's also cases where people are remote, fully remote. And
Yeah, and I think that this specific topic, Fern, I think that let's forget about the North Korean guys for a minute. We've talked about that till it's dead in the.
Yeah.
Let's talk about real Americans. I know people specifically right now that have 3 jobs. That work remote, and 3. And they have mouse jigglers and they are present on the right calls at the right times. I'm talking about regular, everyday people that you and I would know in this community are working multiple jobs. So let's forget about the hacks and the fakes and the, poor intentions from overseas. Let's talk about just people in America who are working 3 jobs and are overemployed.
I don't know. I would say I'm overemployed at my one employer. Just trying to keep up with what I need to do on a daily basis. Is I feel like I'm overemployed. I couldn't imagine
100%.
keeping a second employer, a whole nother job. How do they even manage that? Are they just undertasked where they have time to go and take on another full-time job?
I think that they're positioning themselves to have deliverables and outcomes rather than being measured by how much time they're, physically on meetings, and they're able to knock out those objectives pretty quickly with AI, and they can work 3 jobs, right? Now, here's the catch. If you have 3 jobs and your employers know it and allow you to moonlight, God bless you, because you're working hard and you're making the money you deserve to be paid. But if you are working 3 jobs and your 3 employers don't know that and they assume that you're working full-time for them, that's something you should think about.
Yeah, I think that really sums it up nicely, Troy. And as somebody who encourages my whole team, as many people as possible, to work 2 jobs, it can be done ethically. I encourage everybody I run across to become adjunct faculty in cyber, if not for GCU, at a community college. So I think there's lots of ways you can do it ethically. I'd say a lot of the people we know are on one or more board of director roles, right? You might have a day job and you might be on 3 different boards. I think that's fine. I think the key is to go to your boss, disclose what you're doing. A good IT leader will probably have you notify general counsel too, at least once. Everybody will talk about it. And if it's above board and ethical and disclosed, I think it's fine. But I think, Fern, the article you're referencing is talking more about people again, back to the mouse jigglers, the generative AI, hey, maybe every deliverable is a C- work, just good enough to not get fired, but spread across multiple, and none of them know. I mean, I think that's bordering on fraud, right? So I think, again, it's similar to some of the other ethical topics we've touched on. If it's ethical, if it's above board, if it's disclosed and everybody approves it, I think that's a very different thing than if you have 4 employers and you're trying to keep all of them from finding out, and you're using technology that's not authorized to do that. They give you a process and a procedure and you violate that so you can have multiple jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then that's very unethical.
Yeah, I think most of these people who do it probably feel like they're doing nothing wrong because they're obviously doing what's required of each employer. I think that's probably the way they think about it. Now, if you can't go to those employers and disclose to them that you're doing a second job, then I think that's where the ethics comes in as, okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong here. So if you can't be open about it and you're not sure, then yeah, that's not ethical.
Is there a way to automate this? If I have a job, that's my primary job, and I get an invite for a meeting, but I have a second job that I need to make sure I don't get double booked, right? Is there software for that? Just out of curiosity.
Absolutely.
There
It's
is?
funny. I laughed because you said, "Is there a way to automate this?" It's like exactly what they're doing. They got 3 jobs because they can just automate all of them with AI. It's the point.
So I have something booked into my calendar that when one invite gets accepted, it automatically rebooks that time and schedules a personal meeting for me at my other job. And then I have both blocked off, one legitimate, one actual like work thing. But when the boss looks at my calendar, it's like, oh, he's busy, right? Oh, he's got something to do. Really, I'm just on a call for another company.
Yeah, but shouldn't your
welcome
boss
to
know what
2025.
meetings are in? Where your effort is going, what meetings are in? Because what if you had half your calendar blocked off for personal meetings? Wouldn't that seem kind of fishy?
Hey, my kid's sick. I don't know.
But that's the person, like that person ironically is going to be sabotaged in each of those jobs. Now, I think you were alluding to this, Damian. It's bad management if you don't know what your people are doing, how much quality it is. There's no KPIs. There's no way not to fake it. Now, there is a very ethical pathway for that person who really wants to automate the work and who wants to get their job down to 8 hours and then do other more fun, more creative things. And it's to do it all with that employer and then to get promoted until they'll earn the money of the 4 jobs at the one job because they've revolutionized the workplace, they've invented new processes, they've changed the business. So I'd say like if somebody's watching this that's like working 4 jobs or is thinking of doing that the unethical path, channel all that attention into getting a good job with a good company and then really thriving there and then use that to get that extra income and opportunity.
So I just want to play the opposite. I just wanted to ask you guys a question. Like, so on the opposite end, if you have an employee who's performing at or above expectations, but they're also working a second job, do you care as a manager or leader? Does that bother you?
You do because there's potential conflicts of interest, right? I mean, again, as Mike said, they have to notify you. You have to have your legal counsel sign off on it that there's no conflict. You might be working for a competitor. You might be accidentally giving your brain power, which is intellectual property, to your first employer to the second. So there's a lot of conflicts that you have to, work out. But I think this is a symptom of the world we live in. I think this is going to increase because we are humans are very smart and agile, and this is another revolution of the industrial area. Now we're in the digital and the AI era, so it's like this is a symptom of the fact that we are trying to figure out what the new face of work looks like. And I think that it's going to be a growing pain, but employers will realize that employees are much more effective during their time, and they'll repurpose them hopefully for higher purposes. And they won't be able to get their whole job done in 8 hours. They're going to take a whole week to do it, 40 hours, which is what they're paying them for. So I think this is a symptom of the changing world that we live in. I think we'll adjust pretty well.
Yeah. And by the way, I've been part of investigations where HR has suspected employees of working second jobs. So there's much more than just the mouse jiggler and meetings and things like that. I obviously won't disclose them here, but there's other ways to see if an employee is actually working.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, Damian, because I spend a lot of it's difficult as CISOs to define, how much is our role performance management or how much of our role is cyber security and stopping cyber threats. And it gets gray. I always try to stay out of the performance management business to the max of my ability, but sometimes we all get sucked into it, right? It happens.
There's an easy fix, and I'm going to tell you guys what it is. Everyone just go back to the office. Let's just all have to drive in.
Fern, you want subscribers and listeners, don't you? I'm just saying. Our audience would
I
probably disagree with that.
I think I see the unsubscribes dropping now.
Yeah. No, it's more of a joke. So I was actually talking to someone earlier today that works at a company here locally. And when they were first employed, there was no requirement to be in the office, right? And they happened to be a manager in their department. And what I found interesting was if you live for this person's specific situation, if you live outside of a 45-mile radius from the corporate office, you are, I believe you're required to come in. If you're an individual contributor. So if you live outside of 45-mile radius, you don't have to come in. So if you're an admin or if you're an analyst or you're something that is not in a leadership role specifically, you can stay home 5 days a week, I believe. I don't have the policy, so I can't say definitively. But if you're in a leadership role, management, or anything like an executive role, you're required to go in once a week. And this person doesn't live in the city. They live in non-Phoenix metro. So we're talking a 2-hour commute one way for this specific person. And it's all because they're in a leadership role. That seems ridiculous to me, but that's just my opinion.
In some cases, right, I've seen this where employees move, like let's say you're getting paid a high salary because you live in California, so the cost of living is higher, and then you move to a much lower cost of living state, and you don't even tell HR, right? So are they supposed to give you an updated wage, lower your wage because you're moving to a lower cost of living? There's also taxes you got to worry about. The company has to pay their fair share of taxes to that state. But not even just in the United States. Let's say you go to Mexico and you work from Mexico City and you're getting paid the American wage. Your cost of living is way lower and you didn't tell HR, right? So I think there's all these dynamics that you'd still, ethically, are you allowed to move? And maybe your job was temporarily remote because of COVID. But nowadays, I see a lot of people going back into the office, and not because of mandates so much. A lot of people really miss the human interaction and the face-to-face conversations.
Okay. Well, I could see that. I mean, it does get lonely sitting at home all day with like kids running around, right? Or being stuck with screaming kids. So I actually know a guy that would purposely go into the office, even though he could work from home, because he had 5 boys at home. And he just didn't want to be home with that, right? So there's the opposite case of where you just don't want to be home, so you go into the office. But there's a lot of people that don't have that many kids. They might not have any, and they just want to wake up, roll out of bed, and turn on their laptop from their pajamas, right? I don't know. It's a tough situation, but I do see that with a lot more people going back to the office, there's some people that kind of, I don't want to say hate it, but they definitely don't appreciate it as much as the flexibility of staying home 100% of the time.
Yeah, we were talking last night at dinner about this very subject, about the return to office dynamics, and what we're seeing across the industry is top talent, like top performers, are moving jobs if they're being required to come back in. So companies are taking a huge risk in mandating this return to office policy. I do believe the world has changed after COVID, and I think that we're going to continue to see hybrid environments and dynamics where it's not a 100% mandate for anything, where we're going to find out where people like to work the best and where they're most productive, most creative, and we're going to adapt to that. It's kind of the new face of work, in my opinion. But this whole mandate to return to office is not working.
If you're an independent contributor and you don't have to collaborate with anyone, I don't see the problem in that. But if you need to stand in front of a whiteboard and hash things out, it's hard to do that online, right? There's nothing better than standing right here and drawing it out on the whiteboard in front of 3 or 4 people and having everyone collaborate together. I think it's much more efficient with people in the same room.
Yeah. Even pre-COVID, we were 3 days in the office a week, so Monday and Friday at home, and those extra 2 days meant a lot to a lot of people. It helped with the work-life balance. There's hours of the day that you're not stuck in traffic, and so I think that there is a balance. 100% believe that there's a balance here, and every company has a different dynamic, and every role has a different dynamic. So I think that we just have to be smart about it and understand that things have changed, and we can't just look at it through a single lens anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I'm that whiteboard guy, Damian, and like I always talked about like how much I love the whiteboarding session, but I haven't gotten less effective. And the last time I touched a whiteboard with a marker, I think I've maybe picked up a marker and touched it to a whiteboard twice in the past 2 years, and I didn't get any less effective. I just used different tools for those same things.
Yeah, I just the one thing that you can't do is you can't get people's reactions or you can't see their faces. So we talked about like adjunct teaching. Obviously, I've done my fair share of that. Teaching students
Mm.
on a webinar is a lot harder because you can't see who's paying attention. You can't see who's actively engaged and ask them questions if you're just on the screen.
I think just as controversial is the hybrid versus mandatory back to work versus remote debate is the on camera, off camera debate, right? And because that even makes a difference in online engagement. And are you teaching or are you working? A senior engineer, I don't need to see on camera or be in the office with to be able to solve a problem with. A brand new student who's looking at their first executable in IDA, yeah, I kind of would like to see them look over their shoulder at their screen, look at what they're typing on their keyboard.
I'd like to turn my camera on in Zoom meetings. I just want people to see me and feel like I'm there. And I encourage my team to turn it on, but there's some times you just can't. Right. I mean I travel all types of time zones, and there's sometimes I'm doing a meeting at 11 p.m. I might be in bed, right? I can't just turn on my camera, or I might be just rolling out of bed, like Fern was saying, and just trying to get on the call because it's so early. But you mentioned something about working 8-hour days, Mike. What's a normal? I mean, I know you put in a ton of hours. How many hours do you, just for people who are starting their career? I don't want people to think that, hey, cybersecurity is a 9 to 5 job. So how many hours do you think you put into your career, your job, and everything you do in a day?
I mean, it varies a lot with how crazy this work is. Like in an incident or the week before getting ready for like DEF CON or Cactus Con or that 2 weeks, well upwards of 100 sometimes. But a more common sustainable number, I think it cycles between 50 and 75 if I were to guess. Like my typical day is sometime between 7 and 8 checks some emails, drive, usually a couple earlier meetings, a break in meetings, usually around 9 a.m. to miss traffic to drive in, then in person meetings or Zoom meetings from the office till like 4 or 5 o'clock, drive home, sometimes have dinner with the kids, sometimes a dinner meeting, and then usually work until about 1 a.m., right? Like that's kind of midnight, 1 a.m., and then start it again at 7, 8 the next morning. That's just like a normal Monday through Thursday. And then Friday, I try to cut off a little early and then, work less on the weekends. But I mean, I don't know what all that adds up to, but it's definitely not an 8 to 5 job.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Mike's a machine. Right, I know he goes pretty hard. I tell people if I'm awake, I'm available to work. And most times, I got to be online when other people have meetings, and I have to join those. And then the times that I have lull in my schedule, I got to do actual real work and actually, do stuff that I have deliverables on. Yeah, it's never 9 to 5 or 8 to 5. Sometimes my meetings start at 6 a.m. and sometimes they end at midnight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to quote Shannon, my wife, that always says, if you find the job that you love, you never work another day in your life. I think that we all do this for some of the passion that we have for it, right? There are definitely blocks of hours during the day that you have to sit down and focus. I like to use focus music while I do those tasks that are very heavily gray matter centric. But what we're talking about here in the morning hours before work or the afternoon hours after work, that stuff is things that you really are passionate about or care about, want to get done. Being able to advise startups, talk to venture capitalists, solve real problems in your own company, mentor a new person in the industry. There's so many things that we actually spend our time on that are passion projects and not necessarily work. So there is a balance there. And I think that every person is different and can find that balance in this industry, which is why I love it so much.
Yeah, and one of the myths I want to clear up. Everybody who starts out in cybersecurity says, I want to get to the top. I want to be CISO, so I can tell people what to do. I guarantee you, none of us here tell anybody what to do. We may suggest stuff, but actually, my team tells me what they need to do. It also is not an easy job of just sitting there and telling people what to do. So I want to just clear that up right now.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Go ahead, Troy.
If you're blessed enough to build a team that you trust and does their job, it's a beautiful work of art. It's all about the people. Cybersecurity is a people sport. And when you build that team of people who know what they're doing, who love what they do as much as you do, and you all have this mission in mind, like a football team, you're going after the goal together, concertedly in the same direction, it is magic. And it's something that, you'll never forget.
I love it, Troy. And I mean, like when I look at why I don't think I plan to stay in the job I'm in, more than 8 years later now. The reason I'm here 8 years later, and if things work out, I could see myself in this job in another 8 years, is because of the people, right? Like I've been blessed to, grow with a team, and they're people that I hope to continue to work with for a long time. And that's really what that the people are what excites me about the job, and the cool things I get to work on with the people are why I work until midnight or 1 in the morning, as Damian pointed out, right? So
Build a team that you want to stay with. Sounds like a marriage. Marry someone that you want to be with. But if it doesn't work out, you can stay friends, right? I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, just don't have multiple jobs or multiple spouses, right?
yeah,
Yes, there you go.
some
There's
good
the correlation.
parallels here.
So work hard, do the right thing, and you'll be on the right path. And then maybe one day you won't have to worry about telling people what to do because you've got to a point where they know the right thing to do based on the leadership and guidance you've provided. So I think that kind of puts us towards the end here. I think we're going on just a little bit over an hour. So cover some interesting things today. Overemployed, right, was the most recent one. The one before that was the ransomware. A person, like as Troy pointed out, not the company, but a person that worked for a company doing some things that they shouldn't be doing, double dipping, if you will. And then, of course, Google doing some things that maybe might not be as big of a deal as it came out. And maybe the only people that wanted that case were the lawyers, not the people. So I don't know. Anything else that we want to touch on today for you guys?
No, I think we're good. A lot of ethics this week in different forms. But I just want to say thank you, Mike, for joining us as our very first guest. This is episode number 11. We had held off on the first 10 episodes before we brought a guest in. But thank you for sticking with the format and keeping us in flow.
Yeah, thank you so much, Damian, Troy, and Fern, for having me here. It's been wonderful. Love the conversation.
Hey, you even did that in order too, DTF.
Yes.
Like that.
The DTF Cyber Podcast with a side of DoubleM today. So with that, we'll see you next week, next Monday. If you have any questions, let us know. Email is dtf@cyberpodcast.net. If there's topics you want to hear about, discussions you want to have, or things you want to hear, more specific to maybe things that you're interested in, reach out, let us know. The email is live, and maybe we can start structuring some conversations around things that people are interested in hearing outside of, the weekly articles that we review. So with that, see you all next Monday. Thanks for listening.